Hello guys and welcome back. So we're finally in our very last topic in Power and the People, our GCSE course, and that is the whole topic on immigration to Britain and what happened kind of from 1950 onwards when we saw immigration into Britain. How did this change attitudes in Britain? How did it affect the growth of racism, the growth of segregation in Britain? And how did this change government attitudes and what did government do about it? So I'm going to split this down into a couple of different videos. And we're going to start today by looking at why people came to Britain in the 1950s. So 22nd of June 1948, the Empire Windrush docked at Tilbury near London, carrying 492 people from the Caribbean. This began a wave of migration from the Caribbean and Asia into Britain, and it started what led to be the process that led us to this multiracial, diverse nation that Britain is today. In the final part of the course, as I said, we look at these different things, why people came, and how this affected conflict and how different groups within Britain began to live with each other. So why do people move to Britain? Well, at the beginning of the 20th century, Britain had a large empire. You can see it behind me. After the First and Second World Wars, some of these countries wanted their independence, and they went about different means of asking Britain for that independence. So one example was India, who said, we will help you in the war. We pledge our allegiance to fight in your war. Our soldiers will go and fight with the British Army if you grant us independence after the war. And it's what happened. However, I'm not going to go into it, but the way that Britain left India was a bit, well, not ideal, I guess. And, we had the situation partition where we had the creation of Pakistan and Bangladesh, but that's a whole other topic. It doesn't really matter. Is not in our course, but it's an example. So India said, if we fight in the war, will you give us independence? And Britain said yes. Now, some of these countries that gained independence from Britain wanted to retain some of the ties they had with Britain, and they did this by becoming part of what we call the Commonwealth. Now, for these countries who had fought for Britain in both of the wars and become part of the Commonwealth, in 1948, a law was created, the British Nationality Act. This gave all Commonwealth citizens the chance to come to Britain, the mother country, as it called itself at the time, and come to Britain and move here and gain full citizenship. They'd be granted full citizenship, something that was taken up in, it was part of the quite controversial Windrush scandal recently, where some of these people who came over on board Windrush were then denied citizenship. The government then saying, actually, no, you were right, we were wrong. But 800 million people took up this opportunity and came to Britain because of the British Nationality Act. So we still haven't really got to the bottom of why people actually wanted to move to Britain. Well, the government gave out interest-free loans to people so they could afford the ship fare. There was a shortage of labour for low-paid and unskilled jobs in Britain at the time. Britain was trying to rebuild the country after the war. They'd obviously lost a huge amount of the population, the male population, fighting. They'd had a lot of men gone for quite a long time, and they needed to rebuild the country. So they needed lots of people to fill these jobs. So it was in British government's interest to try and entice workers back into Britain, hence why they gave out these interest-free loans. The London transport system, for example, recruited people from Jamaica and Barbados to be train drivers and bus drivers, and kind of keep London moving. Now, some of these opportunities were not available in home countries, and I guess more to the point, the British held recruitment fairs in the Caribbean, in Jamaica, in Barbados, which meant that people left home knowing they had a job to arrive to, giving them a job security and minimizing the risk and danger of travel. Now, in lots of people's minds was this idea of Britain, the mother country, a home of opportunity. And I guess, it offered lots, and we'll get to in a minute about what the reality of that was, but people moved really for a better life and for job opportunities. So while many people initially expected or were excited about moving, the reality of life in Britain was quite different at the time. So immigrants, those people coming into the country, faced a huge amount of problems, mainly to do with discrimination and racism. Firstly, immigrants were normally placed in areas that needed workers. Now, in the beginning, this meant that it was often lots of young men moving to London or moving to Britain to then send money back to their families. So, what we had was a surge of young black men in concentrated communities, which caused sometimes resentment from the local people who had originally lived there. Now, this often meant that white families left the areas, which created a form of segregation. Now, it's not the same as American segregation with the Jim Crow laws, where it was kind of legalized segregation. This was a bit different, a bit more kind of, I guess, it's not really a word for it, but it was more unofficial segregation. But families would leave areas. So we started to see white areas and black areas. This meant that we have kind of the beginnings of that resentment bubbling and boiling over. Now, in addition, many that moved were highly skilled, lots of doctors and people with qualifications or good education. However, they're forced to take low-paid, unskilled work when they arrive in Britain, as their qualifications were not always recognised. In addition, many landlords refused to rent their accommodation to the Black and Asian community, and even some local authorities did this too. So in one case in Birmingham, residents brought in the support of Malcolm X to kind of support the cause and emphasize the struggle that they were facing, because in 1965, there was lots of racist housing policies and local authorities only renting to white families or refusing to rent to black families in the area. Okay, so this kind of summarizes the problems that these families faced when they arrived. And so this video we've gone through why people came and I guess the initial reality of what arriving in Britain was like.